But this also came from testimony from family members, Klan members, Kennedy Klan members, people who appointed judges by Jack Kennedy later said that Joe was with the mob. So this came from an array of different people, not just mobsters. So Joe Kennedy's in with the mob.
I was going to ask you about that, though, because it's been what? Like you were here like 15 months ago, something like that?
No, well, give or take, I think a year, because it was when the first volume came out.
Yeah.
And that's about a year. So, yeah, maybe, no, a little over a year, actually. First one came out in November of last year.
That was this one, right?
Yeah.
The red one? Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to explain what this is in a minute, people.
Cool.
And then second one's out now. And the third one we're still waiting for?
Third one will be out end of this year or beginning of next. Yeah.
Dude, I'm impressed. You've written a fuck ton doing this.
Yeah,
and obviously it's something close to home because of your own backstory and where you initially came up a long time ago. But the history of all this stuff is intertwined with American history. Of course, when we're talking about the mafia and the Jewish mob and the Irish mob and all that, like it's always been a fascinating topic to me. So I remember when you were in here last, we were saying we got to do one where we really run through this. So you know where I'm going to start off with this, obviously, right?
I have no idea what you. I have no clue. You could go anywhere.
Did they whack JFK?
They had a part in it, a big part in it. Definitely. They had a big part in it, and they did, I would say they did the groundwork. They were the laborers on the project.
The mob.
Yeah, the mob, definitely. Right. So, I mean, we're jumping right in then. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Down and dirty, baby.
Let's do it. So it dates back. Let me start at the start. Robert F. Kennedy joins what was the McClellan Committee. McClellan was a senator out of Arkansas. He forms this committee. Bobby becomes chief counsel for the committee, Bobby Kennedy, and he's going after the mob and Teamsters.
And this is the McClellan Committee, you said?
McClellan Committee.
Let's pull that up
That's
the list
correct.
just so we have it. Go ahead, Lou.
So the McClellan Committee, Bobby's chief counsel, and he talks John into coming on to the committee too. John's a senator at the time, John Kennedy. And Joe Kennedy, Sr., the patriarch of the family, he said, I don't want you doing this. I don't want you going after labor. And he didn't want them going after the mob either. He just felt like, okay, he had connections to the mob, Joe Kennedy Sr., and that's established. And I don't just shoot from the hip. I don't just go with rumors. I source everything in my books. And not only did—
Yeah, I looked at that.
Yeah. And not only did mobsters say, like Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Oni the Killer Madden, not only did mobsters say Joe Kennedy worked with us during Prohibition, during bootlegging, and also too with Hollywood relations, labor relations, when he had a Hollywood company, Joe Kennedy did. But this also came from testimony from family members, Klan members, Kennedy Klan members, people who appointed judges by Jack Kennedy later said that Joe was with the mob. So this came from an array of different people, not just mobsters. So Joe Kennedy's in with the mob.
I was going to ask you about that, though, because I'd had my guy Stu in here for episode 160 where, he does all the research on JFK and MLK. He's written books on it. It's really amazing stuff. And the one place where he lost me a little bit is when he was trying to say that there's really no evidence to point to Joe being involved with the mob. And so I went and dug on this more, and there was one biographer, I forget his name, but I remember because he went to Bucknell, Leslie, maybe we can look that up. But there was one Kennedy biographer who I think lives in New York as well. I should probably get him in here, who had also made the same claim going through all this. But you and everyone else I've ever talked with and everything that I've ever known in studying it is of course you know that he was involved. So what we have direct evidence, meaning like some of these guys said exactly what he did?
Yes, so David Nasaw, Nasaw, I think is the guy, most recent biographer that I read, who said, no, there's no evidence, and they tried to give him a clean slate. That was one of them.
Yeah, that's the guy. That's him.
I got it right, David Nasaw. That's the guy.
That's right.
So there are certain Kennedy biographers and historians who like to preserve the idea of Camelot, this grand image of the Kennedy family and Kennedy himself, and they'll go to any length to deny things that are blatant in your face to preserve that image of Camelot. But if you do a deep dive, as I said, not only Joe Bonanno, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Oni the Killer Madden, but also Kennedy Klan members Gore Vidal was a family member, the great author Gore Vidal.
Oh,
right?
Gore Vidal? Yeah.
Gore Vidal, yeah. So, he's...
Gore Vidal, I love it.
Yeah, he's related in my accent. He's related through the Kennedys through marriage. Also to John H. Davis, related on the Bouvier side.
Yes, so Jackie's
side. These people, they understand from the inside. They're Kennedy clan family members, and also too, as I said, Chicago judge who was appointed by Jack Kennedy to the federal bench. He said there's no way Joe could have ever did the things he did during bootlegging without the mob.
100%.
100%. Now
there's people that try to say he didn't bootleg, though. I'm like,
on top of that.
Is that?
On top of that, he's got a part interest in the Cal Neva Lodge. The Cal Neva was a gambling casino / hotel lodge that sits on the border of California and Nevada because gambling was legal on the Nevada side.
Right.
So he's got an interest there. Frank Sinatra's got an interest there. Sam Giancana's got an interest there. The Genovese family's got an interest there. And at one point, I think Dean Martin, who was part of the Rat Pack, Sinatra's little clique, he said, "I'm the only guy in Hollywood who's partners with 4 gangsters or something, and don't even know who they are. I'm not allowed to talk about it, something like that." So so there's overwhelming evidence. Also, too, post-Prohibition, when Joe Kennedy's got a liquor distribution company, at some point or another, all of that distribution of liquor following Prohibition, when it was repealed, was controlled by mainly Frank Costello, who owned a lot of the distribution networks, but all the mob.
For people who don't know who Frank Costello is, can you just
Frank Costello was the acting boss. Lucky Luciano started a Borgata. And when he created the 5 families, Lucky Luciano, Charles Lucky Luciano was the boss of one of those Borgatas. And when he went to prison, Vito Genovese was his underboss, but Vito had to flee a murder rap and he went to Europe. In his absence, Frank Costello took over the family and was acting boss. And he controlled Tammany Hall for many, many years.
Yep.
The New York Democratic machine was in his pocket. He put judges in. And to give you an idea of his power, at one point, Frank Hogan, who was a prosecutor in New York, he had bugged Costello's telephone line. And he's looking to grab some evidence with regard to a murder that was ordered by Genovese, who was in Europe at the time, of a newspaper editor in New York.
Is this like the 50s, you think?
Yeah, so it was 40s, in the 40s. Yep. So at that time, he listens to the phone conversations, and Supreme Court judge calls Frank Costello, "Hey, Frank, thanks for getting me the appointment to the bench. Anytime you need a hand, you know where it comes from. Anytime
I need it right now."
Exactly. So incredible, right? So Hogan says, "Wow, this guy's appointing judges. I'm going to go to Tammany Hall and start fishing around." So Hogan goes there and he starts questioning all the ward leaders. So what happens is if you control enough ward leaders, you control the head of the hall.
That's right.
You put the guy in. So they question them all. And it was the guy, they all go, "We don't know what you're talking about. Frank Costello who? Who's Frank Costello?" Then they go to this guy named Kennedy, who's the head of Tammany Hall at the time. And they ask him, he goes, "I never heard of Frank Costello." And meanwhile, Costello put him in. So this is how deep the connections went. Right. So now Kennedy, when Jack Kennedy, I'll call him Jack, interchangeably, John or Jack.
Man Jack.
Exactly. Jack Kennedy, by the way, all the research I did, I walked away despising Bobby and loving Jack as people. Forget about politics and all that other stuff. As people, as characters, guys you could grab a beer with, guys you can hang out with. Bobby was just a despicable human being, I felt. I felt like, I'm sorry to say that, but
no, that's okay.
Testimony came from people in his own family. Joe Kennedy Sr. says, "Bobby hates like me. He's vengeful like me. He would have been a great Gestapo during the Nazi era."
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because obviously we'll get to it, but we know what happened when Jack got into office and RFK became AG, and you talk about biting the hand that feeds you.
That's right. So, and Jack Kennedy was like the kind of guy where, people attack him now. He was a philanderer and etc.
A little pussy.
Yeah, what are you going to do, right? I mean, look, it was a different time. Yeah, I mean,
unless he's fucking praying over here.
He was over the top. He was definitely over the top. But as a person, he didn't hold grudges. He was easy to get along with. He felt like, everything was water under the bridge to Jack. He didn't hate people for the rest of his life. He just took life, in stride. And he suffered a lot with all the things, the physical disabilities he had, real disabilities. So, and he got through that and still had a good outlook on life.
Yes.
A lot of people become miserable. He didn't. So you walk away from all of the research and the people who hated and couldn't stand Bobby, it's bipartisan, by the way. Members of his own Democratic Party and members of the Republican Party, people in his own family said this was his character. These were his character flaws. You know, I mean, he had issues, Bobby. He was always looking for somebody to fight.
He was looking for someone to fight.
Yeah, Evan Thomas said it best. He's a good author, too. Evan Thomas wrote a book about Bobby where he said something like, he needed somebody to brawl with all the time. I forget how he phrased it, but it was so accurate, and that was Bobby. So now, just to rewind.
You were talking about the McClellan hearings. That's how we got initially started the tangent.
Joe Kennedy goes, I don't want you involved with this. Bobby fights, pushed back a little. Joe Kennedy's word was law, but there was a little room for argument. Bobby convinced Joe that, look, it'll give us a national name, me and Jack. Jack wants to be president, maybe me next after him. We're going to give ourselves a national name. Now, don't forget Thomas Dewey, who I go deep into in volume 1 of my book.
Governor of New York.
Exactly. Now, before he became governor, he went after the mob, and he made a name for himself. That's right. Yep, Lepke Buchalter, Lucky Luciano, Dutch Schultz, Mad Dog Cole. So he went after all these different guys, Dewey, and he becomes governor of New York, and then he forgets about the mob. He's got the name. And then he becomes a Republican candidate for president. He wanted to make a name for himself. Senator Estes Kefauver, volume 1 of the book, I go deep into Kefauver out of Tennessee.
Kefauver hearings.
Exactly. So after the Kefauver hearings, he makes a big name for himself, a national name. And he says, I'm going to move on. And he goes for the Democratic national nomination for president.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.